The red dust of the Texas panhandle did not just sit on the skin. It worked its way into the pores, settling deep until a woman felt she was made more of earth than of flesh. It was the summer of 1874, and the Llano Estacado was burning under a sun that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of mercy. Clara May Hollis stood on the porch of her small, weathering homestead, wiping her hands on an apron that had once been white, but was now the color of dried clay. The wind was blowing from the west, hot and dry, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the ominous metallic tang of the railroad crews working 5 miles out. At 24 years old, Clara felt twice her age. Her back ached from hauling water from a creek that was retreating further into the mud every day, and her hands were rough, the skin around her fingernails cracked from the dry air. Inside the small cabin, the air was still and stifling. On the narrow cot in the corner lay Toby, her younger brother. He was only 10 years old, a boy who should have been out chasing jackrabbits or learning to rope, but instead, he was flushed with a fever that would not break. His breathing was shallow, a rasping sound that tore at Clara's heart every time the silence of the house amplified it. She walked over to the tin box kept on the high shelf above the stove. She did not need to shake it to know it was light. She took it down anyway, prying off the lid. $3.40, to be precise. It was all that was left from the sale of the last 2 calves. The drought had taken the rest of the herd, or rather, the lack of water had forced her to sell them to Silas Crow for pennies on the dollar just to keep them from dying of thirst. $3 would not buy the medicine Toby needed. Dr. Ellis, the only man in the territory who knew the difference between a fever and a death sentence, was a kind man, but medicine cost money. It had to be shipped in from the east on the very wagons that were slowly being replaced by the iron horse. Clara closed her eyes and touched the hollow of her throat. There, resting against her skin on a leather cord because it was too large for her finger, was her mother's ring. She pulled it out. It was a heavy thing, old gold, battered by time and hard work. It was the only thing her mother had left her, besides the deed to this drying patch of land and a stubbornness that Clara sometimes wished she could trade for a little peace. "It is your koi or your roots," her mother had said, her voice weak in those final days. "It is the promise that we survive." Clara looked at the ring in the dim light. Selling it felt like cutting off a limb, but looking at Toby, shivering under the thin wool blanket despite the heat of the day, she knew she had no choice. Roots were no good if the tree withered and died. She secured the ring back around her neck, tucked the small pistol into the pocket of her skirt, and grabbed her bonnet. She would ride into Copper Creek. She would face the town that looked at her with pity and hunger. And she would do what had to be done, 5 miles away. On the ridge that overlooked the sprawl of Copper Creek, a man sat atop a painted pony that was as still as the stone beneath its hooves. He was young, perhaps 26 years old, with hair the color of a raven's wing and eyes that held the hard, unyielding clarity of the open sky. His name was Toka, known to some of the white soldiers as White Wolf, though he rarely offered them his name at all. He was Comanche. And in this year, in this territory, that word was enough to make a man reach for his rifle or a woman pull her children close. But Toka was not here for war. He wore a shirt of buckskin that had seen many seasons, and at his waist hung a knife with a handle of elk horn. He carried no rifle in his hands, though a repeater was sheathed in the scabbard by his leg. He looked down at the town. Copper Creek was a scar on the land, a cluster of raw timber buildings and canvas tents that seemed to fester in the heat. He could see the line of the new railroad cutting toward it, 2 parallel lines of iron that he knew were the end of the world as his people knew it. He hated this place. He hated the smell of it, the stench of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and coal smoke that drifted up even to this height. But he had a duty. His sister's husband had vanished 2 moons ago. Taken, the tracks suggested, by men who hunted humans for the bounty on their scalps or to sell them into labor down in Mexico. The trail had led Toka here. He touched the flank of his horse, urging him forward. He would have to enter the town. He would have to walk among the people who wanted him dead. And he would have to keep the rage in his belly cold and tight. He could not afford anger. Anger made a man blind. And today, he needed to see everything. Copper Creek was bustling with the frantic, desperate energy of a boomtown that was afraid it might bust before the sun went down. Men shouted at mules. Hammers rang against anvils. And the piano from the Gilded Lily Saloon spilled a tinny, cheerful tune out into the dusty street that sounded entirely out of place. Clara rode her mare. Bess, down the main thoroughfare. She kept her head high, ignoring the stares. A woman alone, especially one clinging to a piece of land that the railroad wanted, was a curiosity. She tied Bess to the hitching post outside the general store, intending to check the price of flour before she went to the pawn shop, just to delay the inevitable. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, a shadow fell over her. "Miss Hollis." The voice was smooth, like oil on water. Clara stiffened. She turned to face Silas Crow. He was a large man, dressed in a suit that was too fine for the dust of Copper Creek, with a watch chain of heavy gold draped across his vest. He owned the bank, the lumber yard, and if rumors were true, half the souls in the county. "Mr. Crow," Clara said, her voice steady. "Hot day for a ride?" Crow said, taking a step closer. He smelled of bay rum and expensive tobacco. "I trust things are well out at the homestead. The creek hasn't run completely dry yet, has it?" He knew. He always knew. He had men watching the water levels better than the farmers did. "We have enough," Clara lied. Crow smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "You know, my offer still stands. Clara, $300. Cash. More than fair for a patch of dust. You could take that boy of yours east. Get him to a city with a real hospital. I hear he is not doing so well." Clara felt a flash of cold anger. "Toby is fine, and the land is not for sale." "Everything is for sale, my dear," Crow said softly. "It is just a matter of finding the right currency. Time is running out. The railroad comes through in 2 months. Once the tracks are laid, the land values will shift. You might find yourself with nothing." "Then I will have nothing," Clara said, brushing past him. She could feel his eyes on her back. Assessing, calculating. He was like a vulture waiting for the animal to stop twitching. She hurried down the boardwalk, her heart pounding. She needed to get to Dr. Ellis, but she needed money first. She turned toward the darker end of the street, where the pawn shop sat sandwiched between a boarded-up land office and the noisy saloon. As she walked, she passed the office of the Indian agent, a man named Whitaker. The door was open, and she glanced inside. Whitaker was sitting behind his desk, a man with a face like a bulldog and sweat stains under the arms of his shirt. He was laughing at something, holding a glass of whiskey in one hand. Standing before his desk were 2 rough-looking men, dust-covered and armed. Clara looked away, but not before she saw the way Whitaker slid a stack of paper currency across the desk to the men. It was none of her business. Corruption in the Indian agency was as common as rattlesnakes in the brush. She had her own war to fight. Toka moved through the town like a ghost. He kept to the shadows where he could, the brim of his hat pulled low. He had left his horse at the edge of town, tied in a thicket of mesquite, knowing a painted pony would draw too much attention. He watched. He listened. He saw the way the white men looked at him, hands drifting toward holsters, eyes narrowing. He did not flinch. He walked with the fluid grace of a predator, projecting a silent warning. "Do not touch me, and I will not kill you." He stopped near the water trough outside the livery stable. From here, he could see the sheriff's office and the agent's building. He was looking for a man named Duke Mallory, a bounty hunter known to work with the agent. The tracks at the site of the abduction had been distinctive, a boot with a split heel. Toka's gaze swept the street. It landed on a woman. She was standing in front of the window of the pawn shop. Her reflection caught in the dirty glass. She was slight, with hair the color of dried wheat pulled back severely, but there was a strength in the set of her shoulders. She looked trapped. Toka knew that look. It was the look of a wolf with its leg in a trap, deciding whether to chew off the limb or wait for the hunter. He watched as she reached up to her neck and pulled out a leather cord. A ring hung from it, flashing in the harsh sunlight. She held it for a long moment, her head bowed. Something about her sorrow resonated with him. He had lost much. His mother to the pox, his father to a soldier's bullet. He understood the weight of objects that held the spirits of the dead. He shifted his gaze back to the agent's office. The two men he had seen entering earlier were coming out. One of them walked with a heavy limp. Toka's eyes narrowed. He looked at the boot. The leather of the heel was split. The prey had revealed itself. But Toka did not move immediately. The street was too crowded. He needed patience. He leaned against the rough wood of the livery, crossing his arms, and waited. His eyes, however, drifted back to the woman. She was still standing there, hesitating. Clara took the ring off the cord. It felt warm in her hand. She rubbed her thumb over the surface, cleaning off a smudge of dust. The light caught the inside of the band, and for the first time in years, she looked closely at the inner curve of the gold. There were scratches there. She had always assumed they were just marks from the jeweler's tools, or wear and tear from the 40 years her mother had worn it. But in this sharp, unforgiving sunlight, the scratches formed a pattern. She squinted. It was not a name. It was not a date. It looked like a jagged line, rising and falling mountains, and below it, a winding curve that snaked back and forth, a river, and right where the river curved sharpest, there was a tiny, distinct triangle. Her mother had never mentioned an inscription. Her mother had only said, "It is your promise." Clara felt a strange chill despite the heat. Why would someone carve a map if that is what it was inside a wedding band? It was too small to be useful, too hidden to be a boast. "Hey, you going in or just blocking the door?" Clara jumped, nearly dropping the ring. A man with a thick beard and eyes red from drink was trying to get past her into the shop. "I am sorry," she stammered, clutching the ring tight in her fist. "Damn heat makes everyone addled," the man grumbled, pushing past her. Clara took a deep breath. She put the mystery of the markings out of her mind. It did not matter what was carved inside. All that mattered was the weight of the gold and what the pawnbroker, a man named Mr. Henderson, would give her for it. She pushed open the door. A bell chimed above her head, a cheerful sound that marked the entry into a place of broken dreams. The shop was dark and smelled of dust and old clothes. Behind a wire cage sat Henderson, a man with spectacles so thick they made his eyes look like boiled eggs. "Mr. Henderson," Clara said, approaching the counter. He looked up, squinting. "Miss Hollis, back so soon I thought you said you would not be needing my services again after you sold your father's pocket watch. Times are hard. Mr. Henderson," Clara said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "I have something of value." She opened her hand and placed the ring on the velvet pad on the counter. Henderson picked it up. He adjusted his spectacles. He turned the ring over in his fingers, weighing it. Then he took out a loop and screwed it into his eye. "Standard gold band," he muttered. "Old style. Heavy. Though, that is good." He leaned in closer, peering at the inside of the band. Suddenly, he went still. Clara watched him. "Is something wrong?" Henderson did not answer immediately. He slowly lowered the ring and looked at Clara. The boredom was gone from his face, replaced by a sharp, predatory interest. He looked from the ring to her, and then back to the ring. "Where did you get this, Miss Hollis?" "It was my mother's," Clara said, defensive. "Why?" Nothing," Henderson said quickly, too quickly. He forced a smile that showed yellow teeth. "It is just a unique piece, very unique." He glanced toward the back room, where his assistant usually sorted inventory. Then he looked back at the ring. "I will need to weigh it properly, and check the purity. It might take a moment. Why don't you wait here? I'm in a hurry. Mr. Henderson, I just need a price." Of course. But for a piece like this, I want to give you a fair price. The best price." He was already backing away, clutching the ring. "Just one moment." He disappeared into the back room. Clara stood alone in the shop. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. Henderson was a miser. He never offered a fair price, and he certainly never looked excited. He looked like a man who had just found a nugget of gold in a stream of mud, outside, on the street. Toka pushed himself off the wall. He had seen the man Mallory head toward the saloon, but as he prepared to follow, he saw a boy run out of the back door of the pawn shop. The boy was sprinting, not toward the saloon, but toward the office of Silas Crow. Toka frowned. He looked at the front of the pawn shop where the woman had entered. The spirits were whispering a warning. The threads of the web were tightening. He hesitated. The hunter in him said to follow Mallory. The man in him, the one who remembered the sorrow in the woman's posture, paused. Inside the shop, Clara heard the murmur of voices from the back room. She stepped closer to the curtain. "Tell Crow," she heard Henderson's hushed voice. "Tell him it is the Hollis girl. She has the marker, the one he has been looking for. Yes, the ring." Clara's blood ran cold. The marker. She realized with a jolt of terror that the ring was not just gold. It was the reason Crow had been pestering her. It was the reason for the offers. He did not just want the land. He wanted whatever secret her mother had carried on her finger for 40 years. She had to get it back, now. But before she could move, the bell above the door chimed again. Heavy boots stepped onto the floorboards. Clara turned. Standing in the doorway was not a customer. It was one of the men she had seen in Whitaker's office, the one with the split boot heel. He was looking at her, and his hand was resting on the butt of a heavy revolver. "Mr. Crow sends his regards. Miss Hollis." The man grinned. "And he suggests you wait right here." Clara took a step back, her hand brushing the pocket where her small pistol lay. The air in the shop suddenly felt very thin, and the distance to the door looked like a mile. Outside, the sun beat down on the red dust, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding beneath the tin roof. But across the street, the white wolf had stopped watching. He was moving now, crossing the dusty road, his steps silent, his eyes fixed on the door of the pawn shop. The hunt for the missing kin could wait for 5 minutes. This, he sensed, was a different kind of hunt. The heat shimmered off the ground, distorting the horizon, making the town of Copper Creek look like a mirage that might vanish if the wind blew hard enough. But the danger was solid. It was real. And it was standing right in front of Clara May Hollis. The heavy man standing in the doorway of the pawn shop was named Vance. He was not a man of high standing in Copper Creek. He was a hired hand for Silas Crow, known mostly for his ability to use his bulk to block light and hope alike. He stood there now, his thumbs hooked into his gun belt, staring at Clara with a look that made her skin crawl. Clara took a step back, her hand tightening around the fabric of her skirt where the small pistol was hidden. She could feel the weight of the firearm, but she also knew the weight of reality. Drawing a weapon on Crow's man in the middle of town would not save her brother. It would only get her thrown in the jail cell next to the drunkards, and Toby would be left alone to burn up with fever in the empty cabin. "Mr." Henderson emerged from the back room. The change in his demeanor was as sharp as a sudden frost. Gone was the bored, dismissive shopkeeper. In his place was a man vibrating with nervous energy, his eyes darting between Clara and the man at the door. He held the ring in his left hand. His fingers curled tightly around it as if he feared it might sprout wings and fly away. "I have examined the item," Henderson said, his voice pitching higher than usual. He did not look at Clara. He looked past her, toward Vance. "It is a complicated piece, very specific provenance. I do not care about the history, Mr. Henderson," Clara said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steady it. "I only need the money. Dr. Ellis has the medicine, but he needs payment to order more from the supply train. $20. That is all I ask. It is worth 5 times that in gold weight alone." Henderson finally looked at her, and his expression was a mix of pity and greed. "Gold weight is not the only factor. Miss Hollis, there are entanglements. This ring, it belongs to a set of interests that Mr. Crow has been curating. Clara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It belongs to me. It was on my mother's hand when she died, and on her mother's before that. It has nothing to do with Silas Crow. Everything in Copper Creek has to do with Silas Crow, Vance said from the doorway. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his boots. The bell above the door gave a weak, defeated chime. Mr. Henderson here sent a runner. Mr. Crow is very interested in acquiring this piece. He says it might help clear up that little debt you have on the land. The land is not for sale, Clara snapped. And I'm not selling the ring to Crow. I am pawning it. I will buy it back when the steers go to market. Henderson shook his head slowly. I am afraid I cannot offer a loan on this, Miss Hollis. It is a direct sale or nothing, and the price is $10. That is the offer. $10, Clara gasped. That will not even cover half the medicine. You are trying to steal it. It is $10 more than you have, Vance said, taking another step closer. The shop felt suddenly very small. Take the money, girl. Go buy the boy some laudanum and let the men handle business. Clara looked at the ring in Henderson's hand. It was her lifeline. It was the only thing holding her to the past, and now, it was the only thing that could secure a future for Toby. But $10 was an insult. It was a trap. If she took it, she lost the ring forever, and Toby would still be sick, if she refused. Vance looked ready to take it by force and call it civil forfeiture. I will not take $10, Clara said, backing up until her heels hit the display case. Give me back the ring. Cannot do that, Henderson said, clutching it to his chest. It is already logged in the ledger. Sale pending. That is a lie, Clara cried out. Desperation clawed at her throat. She looked around the dim shop, seeing the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, the old guitars and silver teapots that belonged to other people who had hit hard times. She felt completely, utterly alone. Please, I just need time. I will pay you back double next month. Just do not sell it to Crow. Vance laughed, a low, wet sound. Begging does not look good on you. Schoolteacher. Makes you look common. He reached out, his hand heavy and calloused, intending to grab her arm and usher her out of the shop now that the transaction was theoretically concluded. The bell above the door chimed again. It was not a hesitant sound this time. The door opened with purpose, letting in a blast of the furnace-hot wind from the street. Vance turned, annoyed at the interruption. Shop is closed. Get out. The figure in the doorway did not move. It was the Comanche, the white wolf. Toka stood silhouetted against the blinding white glare of the afternoon. He stepped inside, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was not looking at Vance. He was not looking at Henderson. His dark eyes were fixed on Clara. He saw the flush of anger on her cheeks, the way her chest heaved with shallow breaths, and the way her hand hovered near her pocket. He saw a woman cornered. The lady asked for her ring, Toka said. His English was clear, accented with the cadence of the plains, but without the broken stumbling the townsfolk often mocked. His voice was low, vibrating through the clutter of the shop. Vance sneered, his hand dropping back to his gun. This does not concern you, Redskin. Get back to the reservation before I collect the bounty on your scalp. Toka ignored the threat as one ignores a buzzing fly. He moved further into the room. He did not walk like a man entering a store. He walked like a man entering a canyon where he knew every rock and shadow. He stopped 3 feet from Clara, placing himself between her and Vance. How much? Toka asked, his gaze shifting to Henderson. Henderson blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. I beg your pardon. The medicine, Toka said. How much does she need? Henderson looked at Vance, terrified. Vance looked furious. She needs $20. Vance spat. But she is not getting it from you. You do not have 2 nickels to rub together. Toka reached into the leather pouch at his belt. He did not hurry. He moved with a deliberate slowness that was more terrifying than speed. He pulled out a handful of coins, heavy silver dollars and a few gold pieces payment from a cattle drive he had guided 3 months prior. He counted out $25 onto the glass countertop. The sound of the heavy metal striking the glass was loud in the silence. Clink, clink, clink. 20 for the medicine, Toka said calmly. 5 for the interest. He looked at Henderson. Give her the ring. Henderson stared at the gold. It was real. It was more cash than he had seen in the drawer all week. But he was terrified of Crow. I cannot, Mr. Crow. He specifically. Toka did not shout. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the counter. The muscles in his forearms shifted under his copper skin. You run a business of trade. Do you not money for goods? Here is the money. If you do not make the trade, then you are not a businessman. You are a thief, and the law says a man can defend his property from thieves. He glanced sideways at Vance. And anyone who helps them. Vance was tense, his fingers twitching near his revolver. But he was a bully, not a gunman. He saw the knife at Toka's waist, the repeater in the scabbard on his back. And more importantly, he saw the absolute lack of fear in the Comanche's eyes. Vance knew that if he drew, he might kill the Indian, but he would likely die doing it. He was paid to intimidate women, not to die for a pawnshop owner. Vance took a step back, spitting on the floor. Crow is going to hear about this. He is going to burn this whole place down. Let him listen, Toka said. Henderson, seeing his protection retreat, crumbled. With shaking hands, he slid the ring across the glass, away from his own chest and toward the pile of coins. He swept the money into his drawer instantly, as if fearful it would vanish. Toka picked up the ring. Clara had not breathed for what felt like a minute. She stared at the man standing beside her. He smelled of sage, wood smoke, and horse. He was taller than her, broad-shouldered, and his presence was overwhelming. She had been taught that men like him were savages, godless killers who took what they wanted, but he had just bought her life back. Toka turned to her. He held the ring up between his thumb and forefinger. The gold caught the light, dull and heavy. This is my mother's ring, Clara whispered, her voice cracking. The shame of nearly losing it, the relief, and the fear of what this stranger would demand in return crashed over her all at once. I will pay you back. I promise. I just need time. Toka did not speak immediately. He looked at the ring, then at her face. He saw the pride she was trying to hold on to, the same pride that had made her stand up to Crow's man. He respected that, among his people. A woman who defended her lodge was honored. He reached out and took her left hand. Clara flinched, her eyes widening. Her skin was rough, calloused from the hoe and the rain. But his hand was warmer, harder. He did not pull her. He held her hand steady, his grip firm but strangely gentle. He lowered his head. For a heartbeat. Clara thought he was examining her palm. Instead, he turned her hand over and pressed his lips to the back of her knuckles. It was not a kiss of courtship in the way the boys in the town dances did it, sloppy and eager. It was deliberate. It was searing. His lips were dry and warm against her skin. The contact sent a shock through her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a sudden, sharp awareness of him as a man. It was a gesture of fealty, of recognition. It was intimate in a way that made the breath catch in her throat. He lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. He placed the ring into her palm and closed her fingers over it. It stays with you, he said. His voice was a low rumble, final and absolute. Clara stood frozen, her hand clenched around the warm gold. She was trembling. Why? She asked, the word barely a whisper. Why would you do that? Because a wolf does not hunt the wounded, Toka said. And because you stood your ground. He turned and walked toward the door, not looking back at Henderson or Vance. Come, the medicine. Clara stared at his back for a second, then shook herself awake. She glared at Vance, who was sulking in the corner, and hurried out of the shop after Toka. The street was bright and cruel after the dimness of the shop. As Clara stepped onto the boardwalk, clutching the ring to her chest, she realized that the world had shifted. People were watching, misses, Gable, the milliner, had stopped sweeping her porch. The blacksmith had lowered his hammer. Eyes were fixed on the two of them, the white woman with the debt and the Comanche warrior walking side by side. The whispers started immediately, like dry leaves skittering over stone. "Did you see that?" With the savage. "Crow will not like this." Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. She hurried to catch up with Toka, who was walking toward Dr. Ellis's office with long, easy strides. "Wait," she called out. Toka stopped near the water trough, turning to face her. The wind whipped a strand of black hair across his face. "You should not have done that," Clara said, breathless. They will think—" "They will think what they wish to think," Toka said. "Their thoughts do not bring rain. They do not cure fevers." "You spent $25, Clara insisted. "That is a fortune. I cannot repay you today. I might not be able to repay you for months." "I did not ask for money," Toka said. Clara stiffened. I am not that kind of woman either. If you think that buying this ring means you bought—" Toka's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "I do not buy people. That is the way of the white man. That is the way of the men who took my kin." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the passers-by could not hear. "I bought you time. Now, I need a trade." Clara gripped the ring tighter. "What kind of trade?" "You are of this town," Toka said. "You speak to the shopkeepers, the doctor, the women. Ears are open to you that are closed to me. When I ask questions, I get silence or I get bullets." He gestured toward the far end of town, toward the railhead. "My sister's husband. He was taken. The trail ends here. The man inside the shop, the one who threatened you. He works for the man who hires the hunters." Clara realized he meant Vance, and by extension, Crow. "You want me to spy on Silas Crow?" "I want you to listen," Toka corrected. "I need to know where they are keeping the prisoners. The agent, Whitaker. He signs the papers, but he does not keep the men. They are hidden somewhere else." Clara looked at the ring in her hand. She looked at the doctor's office where the medicine waited. She thought of Toby, burning up, and she thought of the way Toka had stood between her and Vance, a shield of bronze and leather. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid. Being seen conspiring with a Comanche could get her shunned, or worse. But Silas Crow had already declared war on her. He had tried to steal her dignity along with her land. This man, this stranger who had kissed her hand with such startling reverence, had given it back. "Dr. Ellis," Clara said suddenly, He treats everyone, even the railroad workers, even the men Crow hires. If anyone knows where people are being kept, or where the sick ones are taken, it is him." Toka nodded once. "Then we go to the doctor." "If I do this," Clara said, lifting her chin, "if I help you find your family, the debt is cleared, the $25. Toka looked at her, and for the first time, a ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It softened the harsh lines of his face, making him look younger, less like a weapon and more like a man. "If you help me find him," Toka said, "I will consider us even, but the ring stays with you regardless. A promise is a promise." Clara nodded. She felt a strange sensation in her chest, a fluttering that was partly anxiety and partly something else, a feeling of being seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara May Hollis." "Toka," he replied. "Toka," she repeated, testing the sound of it. It sounded like stone striking stone. "Come, Clara May Hollis," he said, turning back toward the street. "Your brother waits." As they walked together toward the small clinic, the whispers grew louder, venomous and shocked. But Clara found that she did not care as much as she had 5 minutes ago. She had the ring. She had the means to get the medicine. And walking beside the white wolf, she felt a dangerous, exhilarating spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she was not fighting this battle alone anymore. Across the street, inside the dark office of the Indian agent, Whitaker watched through the blinds. He saw the exchange. He saw the Comanche and the girl. He turned to the man sitting in the shadows of the room, Silas Crow himself, who had come to inspect the new shipment of rifles. "Well," Whitaker muttered, wiping sweat from his neck. "That is an interesting development. The Hollis girl has made a friend." Crow swirled the whiskey in his glass. He did not look worried. He looked amused. A desperate woman and a lost savage. It changes nothing. Whitaker, it just makes the game a little more sporting. Get the bounty hunter, get Duke Mallory. Tell him the price on the wolf just went up, and tell him to bring me the ring. I want to see what is carved on the inside that makes a pauper spend $25 to keep it. Crow finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp clack. If they want to play house, let 'em. We will burn the roof down over their heads soon enough. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling the red dust around Clara and Toka, binding their paths together as they stepped into the shadow of the clinic door. The alliance was formed, fragile as spun glass, but forged in the heat of a Texas afternoon. Dr. Ellis was a man who moved with the precise, economic grace of someone who had spent a lifetime mending what others had broken. His office, a small clapboard structure set apart from the main thoroughfare of Copper Creek, smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. He was a man of color in a territory that did not look kindly on his skin, yet his hands were steady as he measured the laudanum and quinine into a brown glass bottle. "The boy needs to keep cool," Dr. Ellis said, his voice a low rumble. He corked the bottle and handed it to Clara. "And he needs water, clean water, Clara, not the mud from the bottom of the trough." "I know," Clara said, clutching the bottle as if it contained salvation itself. "Thank you, Dr. Ellis." The doctor wiped his hands on a rag. He glanced toward the window, where the silhouette of Toka could be seen standing guard in the fading light. The Comanche had not entered the office. He understood the boundaries of this world better than most. "You are walking a dangerous path, Miss Hollis," Ellis said quietly. "Silas Crow does not like to lose, and he certainly does not like to be outbid by a man he considers livestock." "I did not ask for his help," Clara replied, though the defense felt thin on her tongue. "But he gave it when no one else would." "I am not judging you, child," Ellis said, his eyes kind but weary. "I am warning you. I heard the telegraph operator talking earlier. Crow sent a wire to Fort Griffin. He is calling for a man named Duke Mallory." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Duke Mallory was a name whispered in the saloons with a mixture of awe and revulsion. He was a hunter of men, a tracker who specialized in bringing in scalps when the law was too slow. "Get the boy his medicine," Ellis said, opening the door for her. "And stay off the main road tonight. The wind is picking up. It will cover your tracks, but it will hide theirs, too." Clara stepped out into the twilight. The sky was a bruised purple, streaked with the orange of a dying sun. The heat of the day was rising from the earth, meeting the cooling air to create a restless, swirling atmosphere. Toka was waiting by her mare, Bess. He did not speak as she approached. He simply checked the cinch on her saddle, his movements efficient and sure. "We cannot leave yet," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "The doctor said Crow is calling in a hunter. If we ride out now, while there is still light, we will be seen." Toka looked at the sky, then at the bustling street where the lamps were beginning to flicker to life. "The night has eyes, too, but the shadows are deeper. We need a place to wait until the moon is obscured." "I know a place," Clara said. "Ruth's." Ruth's establishment was technically a saloon, but it sat on the ragged edge of town, a place where the floorboards were swept clean and the whiskey was not watered down. Ruth was a widow who had buried 2 husbands and shot a third who tried to rob her. She feared God, but she feared no man. They entered through the back, into the storeroom that smelled of sawdust and pickled eggs. Ruth found them there, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a formidable woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Well," Ruth said, looking from Clara to Toka, "I heard the news. Half the town says you have been kidnapped. The other half says you have gone native. I see the truth is somewhere in the middle." We just need to wait for full dark, Clara said. Please, Ruth. Ruth sighed, but she motioned to a stack of grain sacks. Sit. I will bring some coffee. But if anyone asks, you were never here. I run a respectable business. Mostly. She left them in the dim light of the storeroom. Clara sat on a sack of flour, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline of the pawnshop confrontation was fading. Toka remained standing, peering through a crack in the wooden wall that looked out onto the alley. You are shaking, Toka observed. He did not look at her, but he missed nothing. I'm angry. Clara lied, though it was only half a lie. And I'm worried about Toby. Fear is useful, Toka said. It keeps the senses sharp, but panic is a thief. It steals your breath. He turned to look at her. In the gloom, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. Why did you keep the ring? You could have taken the $10. It would have bought some medicine. Clara touched the ring where it hung around her neck again. It is not just gold. It is proof. Proof that my mother existed. Proof that we belong to this land as much as Crow does. She hesitated, then unclasped the chain. And there is something else. Inside the band. I saw it today for the first time. She held the ring out to him. Toka stepped closer. He took the ring, tilting it to catch the sliver of light coming through the cracks in the wall. He studied the inner surface, his eyes narrowing. The river, he murmured. And the split stone. You know it? Clara asked, her heart leaping. It is a place, Toka said, handing the ring back. 2 days' ride from here, deep in the canyon lands. The twisted Snake Creek. There is a rock there, split by lightning long ago. My people use it as a marker for the winter camp when the buffalo move. My mother never went to the canyon lands, Clara said, frowning. She was a school teacher from Ohio before she married my father. Perhaps, Toka said. Or perhaps she had a life before you knew her. The mark is clear. It is not a decoration. It is a map. Before they could discuss it further, the back door opened, and Ruth slipped in with 2 tin mugs of coffee. Drink up. The moon is behind the clouds. If you are going, go now. And Clara looked up. Watch your back, Ruth said grimly. I saw Vance riding out toward the railhead. He was not alone. The ride back to the homestead was a battle against the elements. The wind that Dr. Ellis had predicted arrived with a vengeance, whipping up the topsoil into a blinding, stinging haze. The red dust of Texas became a living thing, choking the air and obscuring the trail. Clara wrapped her shawl around her face, squinting against the grit. Bess was nervous, tossing her head, but Toka's pony remained calm. Toka rode close to her, his knee sometimes brushing hers. He did not use reins. He guided his horse with the pressure of his legs, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the animal. At one point, the trail disappeared entirely under a drift of new sand. Clara pulled Bess to a halt, panic rising in her throat. I cannot see the landmarks. The fence line should be here. Toka did not hesitate. He dismounted, handing his reins to Clara. He crouched low to the ground, touching the earth with his palm. He moved forward a few paces, disappearing into the swirling dust, then reappeared a moment later. Here, he said, his voice cutting through the wind. The earth is harder here. The wagon rut is buried, but the ground remembers the weight. He led her horse by the bridle, walking on foot through the storm until they found the lee of a small rise. He was not just a warrior. He was a creature of this land. He read the wind and the soil as easily as Clara read her Bible. When they finally reached the cabin, the relief was so sharp it almost brought Clara to her knees. She stumbled inside, lighting the lantern with shaking hands. Toby was where she had left him, his face flushed, tossing in his sleep. Water, Toka commanded. Clara fetched the bucket. Together, they lifted the boy. Clara administered the medicine, measuring the drops with agonizing care, while Toka bathed the boy's forehead with a cool cloth. His large hands were surprisingly gentle, wringing out the rag and dabbing the sweat from Toby's brow. After an hour, Toby's breathing deepened into a more natural rhythm. The fever was breaking. Clara slumped into the rocking chair, exhausted. She watched Toka. He had moved to the window, peering out into the dark, watching for any sign of pursuit. "You are hurt," Clara said suddenly. She had noticed a dark stain on the sleeve of his buckskin shirt. Toka glanced at his arm. "It is nothing. A branch in the dark." "Let me see," Clara said, standing up. The authority in her voice surprised even her. "You bought the medicine. The least I can do is make sure you do not get gangrene in my kitchen." Toka hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. There was a long, jagged gash running from his elbow to his wrist, likely from a mesquite thorn or a sharp rock during the ride. It was bleeding sluggishly. Clara fetched the basin of water and a clean strip of linen. She pulled a chair close to him. "Sit." He sat. The room was quiet, save for the wind howling outside and the rhythmic rasp of Toby's breathing. Clara took Toka's arm in her hands. His skin was warm, the muscle beneath it hard and tense. She dipped the cloth in the water and began to clean the wound. Toka hissed in a breath through his teeth but did not pull away. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I know it stings. Pain tells you are alive." Toka said. He was watching her face. She was close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, faint beneath the scent of dust and sweat. Her lashes were long, casting shadows on her cheeks in the lantern light. "Why do you stay?" Toka asked. "The land is dying. The men are cruel. You have no husband to protect you?" Clara paused, the cloth hovering over his arm. "This is my home. My father built this cabin. My mother is buried under the cottonwood tree out back. If I leave them behind." "Home is not wood and stone," Toka said. "Home is where the spirit can breathe. My people move with the buffalo. Our home is the horizon. When the white men put fences up, they cut the throat of the land. I cannot move with the buffalo," Clara said softly, wrapping the linen around his arm. "I have Toby. I need stability. I need to know where the next meal comes from." "And yet," Toka said, "you barter your stability for a ring with a map to a canyon you have never seen." Clara tied the knot on the bandage. She looked up, and their faces were inches apart. The tension in the room shifted. It was no longer about the wound or the storm. It was about the heat radiating between them, the shared danger, the strange alliance that felt more solid than anything Clara had known in years. "Maybe I am tired of being stable," Clara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I want to know what my mother knew, why she kept that ring hidden." Toka reached out with his uninjured hand. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline for a second, rough skin against smooth. "To find the truth," Toka said, "you must be willing to walk away from the firelight." The moment hung suspended, fragile and heavy. Clara felt a pull toward him, a magnetic force that terrified and thrilled her, but before she could lean in, or pull away, a sound cut through the noise of the wind. It was the distinct, rhythmic tapping of a horse's hoof against a stone, followed by the jingle of a bit. Toka was on his feet in an instant, the tender moment shattered. He blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay down," he whispered. He moved to the door, opening it a crack. Clara grabbed her father's shotgun from the mantel and knelt beside Toby's bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the wind carried voices. "Check the barn. If the mare is wet, she is here." It was Vance's voice. Toka looked back at Clara. In the dark, she could only see the whites of his eyes. He signaled for her to stay put. He slipped out into the night, silent as smoke. Clara waited. She heard the barn door creak open. She heard a curse, and then a dull thud, like a sack of grain hitting the floor. Silence returned. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the door to the cabin opened. Clara raised the shotgun. "It is me." Toka's voice came from the dark. He stepped inside, dragging a man by the collar. He dumped the figure onto the floor. It was not Vance. It was a younger man, one of the hired guns from the saloon. He was unconscious. "They split up," Toka said. "Vance went to the South Ridge to circle back. This one was careless." Toka knelt by the man and rifled through his pockets. He pulled out a piece of paper. He moved to the fireplace, where the embers still glowed, and held the paper to the faint light. "What is it?" Clara asked, lowering the gun. "A telegraph receipt," Toka said grimly. "From Whitaker to Crow." He handed it to her. Clara squinted at the scribbled handwriting. "Package secured. North Shed. Will trade for map. No witnesses." "Package," Clara whispered. "Not a package," Toka said. His voice was cold, vibrating with a suppressed rage. "A person. Whitaker is the Indian agent. He controls the rations. If he has secured something to trade for a map, it means he has taken one of my people." "Your brother-in-law?" Clara asked. "Perhaps, or someone else valuable enough to force a trade." Toka stood up. The bandage on his arm was white in the gloom. "They are holding him at the North Shed. That is the old supply depot near the railhead." "If we go there," Clara said, realizing the implication. "We are walking right into Crow's territory." "If we do not," Toka said, "they will kill the prisoner once they realize you have the map and will not sell. They are using the prisoner as leverage, but they do not know I am here. They think you are alone. A schoolteacher with a sick brother." Clara looked at Toby, sleeping peacefully now. Then she looked at the ring on her finger. She thought of the North Shed, a place of darkness and iron. "They are wrong," Clara said. She stood up, checking the load in the shotgun. "I am not alone." Toka looked at her, and in the darkness, she saw a nod of respect. "We ride?" Toka said. "But not on the horses. We walk. The wind will cover our sound." "What about Toby?" "We leave him. He is safer here sleeping than with us. I will set a trap at the door. If Vance comes back, he will regret it." They prepared in silence. Clara put on her heavy coat. She felt a strange calm settle over her. The social ruin she had feared the whispers. The judgment seemed insignificant now. The reality was simple. There were men who took, and there were people who protected. She had chosen her side. As they slipped out into the howling night, leaving the safety of the cabin behind, Clara realized that the ring had not just bought her time, it had bought her a war, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to fight it. They moved toward the town lights in the distance, two shadows against the storm, walking toward a confrontation that would demand more than just gold to settle. They approached the outskirts of Copper Creek from the north. Skirting the newly laid tracks, the North Shed loomed ahead, a hulking structure of timber and sheet metal. A single lantern burned outside. Two guards stood by the door, trying to light cigarettes in the wind. Toka signaled Clara to crouch behind a stack of railway ties. He pointed to the roof of the shed. "I go high. You create a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Clara hissed. "The kind that makes them look away from the shadows," Toka said. He vanished into the dark. Clara gripped her shotgun, her mind racing. She was a school teacher. She taught arithmetic and grammar. She did not create distractions for Comanche warriors to infiltrate enemy strongholds. But then she remembered the debt. She remembered the kiss on her hand. And she remembered the look in Crow's eyes when he threatened her land. She picked up a heavy iron spike from the ground. She looked at the stack of empty oil barrels near the perimeter fence. She took a deep breath, reared back, and threw the spike with all her strength. It struck the barrels with a deafening, metallic clang that rang out like a gunshot in the night. The guards jumped, rifles snapping up. "Who is there?" as they moved toward the noise, leaving the door unguarded for a split second. "Over there," one shouted, his voice thin against the wind. "Someone is by the fuel dump." They ran toward the noise, boots crunching on the gravel, leaving the heavy timber door of the shed unguarded for a precious few seconds. Clara held her breath, gripping her father's shotgun so tightly her knuckles turned white. She watched the roofline. A shadow detached itself from the eaves. Toka dropped silently to the ground, landing in a crouch that absorbed the impact. He did not look at Clara. He moved instantly to the door, slipping a flat metal shim from his belt into the gap of the lock. There was a dull click, and he disappeared inside. Clara waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The guards were circling the barrels now, confused. "Nothing here," one yelled. "Probably a coyote knocking things over." "In this wind," the other spat. "Check the perimeter." They were turning back. Clara knew she had seconds. She looked toward the shed door, willing it to open. It did. Toka emerged, supporting the weight of another man. The prisoner was not young. He was an elder, his gray hair matted with blood, his face swollen from a beating. He wore the buckskin of the Comanche, but his clothes were torn. He stumbled, his leg dragging, but he made no sound. Toka signaled to Clara. The signal was sharp. "Move, now!" They did not go back the way they came. Toka led the injured man into the deep shadows between the shed and a stack of waiting lumber. Clara followed, keeping low. They moved with a desperate urgency, skirting the edge of the rail yard where the new tracks gleamed like bones in the moonlight. Behind them, a shout went up. "The door! The lock is broken!" A gunshot cracked the air, wild and aimless, but it signaled the end of stealth. "Run!" Toka said, his voice a low growl. He hoisted the elder onto his back, displaying a strength that seemed impossible for his lean frame. They scrambled down the embankment, sliding through the loose shale, and vanished into the labyrinth of the dry creek bed just as the alarm whistle at the depot began to scream. They found refuge in the root cellar behind the charred remains of an old homestead, miles from town. It was a place Ruth had told Clara about, a hole in the ground covered by rotting planks and overgrown mesquite. Once inside, lit only by a single match that Clara struck, the reality of their situation set in. The elder, whose name was Gray Bear, sat heavily against the earthen wall. Toka offered him water from a canteen. "They wanted the water," Gray Bear rasped, speaking in Comanche, which Toka translated quickly for Clara. "They wanted me to tell them where the split rock is. I told them nothing." Clara knelt beside him. The split rock Gray Bear looked at her, his eyes narrowing as he saw the ring on her finger. He reached out a trembling hand. "You carry the promise." "My mother's ring," Clara said. "Not just a ring," Gray Bear said, switching to a broken, heavy English. "A treaty. Your mother. She was a healer. She found our camp when the pox came, 10 winters ago. She brought medicine when the white doctors refused. The chief gave her that ring. It was trade, medicine for water." Clara stared at the gold band. "Water? The ring is the map," Toka said, his voice grave. He looked at Clara. "The markings inside, the river, the triangle, it leads to the underground spring beneath the split rock in the canyon. It is the only source that never runs dry, even in the great droughts. That is why Crow wants it." Clara felt a wave of nausea. He does not just want the land for the railroad. He wants the water rights. If he controls the spring, he controls the cattle, the town, and the reservation. He can starve everyone out. "He is already doing it," came a voice from the entrance of the cellar. Clara spun around, raising the shotgun. It was Dr. Ellis, followed closely by Ruth. They looked haggard, their clothes covered in dust. "Put it down, girl," Ruth said, climbing down the ladder. "It is just us, and bad news." Dr. Ellis moved immediately to check on Gray Bear. "We had to leave town," the doctor said grimly as he examined the elder's wounds. "Crow has the whole town in a frenzy. He is telling everyone that a war party attacked the depot. He says the Comanche kidnapped you and are holding you for ransom." "What?" Clara gasped. "But I am right here. I helped break him out. Truth does not matter when fear is selling newspapers," Ruth said, pulling a flask from her pocket. "Crow has turned them against you. Clara, he says you lured the guards away so the savages could steal dynamite. They are calling you a traitor, a race traitor." Clara slumped back against the dirt wall. The label stung worse than a slap. She had spent her whole life trying to be respectable, trying to pay off her father's debts, trying to be a good woman in a hard world, and in one night, it was gone. "There is more," Dr. Ellis said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. "I took this from the Indian agent's office while the chaos was happening. Whitaker is not just selling rations. He is forging land deeds. He has already signed over the rights to the canyon lands to Crow's Railroad Company. But the deed is worthless without the specific location of the spring. They need the survey markers. They need the ring, Clara whispered. And they will burn the territory to get it. Toka said. He stood up, his presence filling the small space. We must move. This place is not safe. The hunter, Mallory, he is not a fool. He will track us. We need to get Toby, Clara said, panic suddenly seizing her throat. We left him at the cabin. Toka's face darkened. I set traps. Traps stop men, Ruth said quietly. They do not stop Duke Mallory. The ride back to Clara's homestead was a nightmare of silence and speed. They took the horses Ruth and Ellis had brought, leaving the elder in the care of the doctor at the cellar. Toka rode lead, his rifle across his saddle, his eyes scanning every shadow. When the cabin came into view, Clara knew immediately that something was wrong. The door was standing wide open. The lantern light spilled out onto the porch, inviting and terrible. Clara did not wait for the others. She kicked her horse into a gallop, ignoring Toka's warning shout. She pulled up at the porch, leaped off, and ran inside. Toby. The cabin was empty. The bed where her brother had been sleeping was stripped bare. The quilt was gone. The medicine bottle lay shattered on the floor, a dark stain spreading on the wood. Clara spun around, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Toby! There was no answer, only the wind whistling through the open door. Toka entered behind her. He did not call out. He moved to the door frame. There, stuck into the wood with a heavy Bowie knife, was a piece of paper. He pulled it free and handed it to Clara. It was not written in ink. It was written in charcoal, crude and hasty. The bridge, dawn. The ring for the boy. No tricks. Clara stared at the paper. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the floor, clutching the note to her chest. They have him, she whispered. He is sick. He needs his medicine. The night air will kill him. Ruth and Dr. Ellis appeared in the doorway. They saw the empty bed and the note, and their faces fell. Mallory, Ruth spat. That son of a bitch. Clara looked up, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dust. I have to give it to them. I have to give them the ring. If you give them the ring, Dr. Ellis said gently, Crow wins. He gets the water, the town, the tribe. Everyone loses. I do not care about the town, Clara screamed, her voice breaking. They called me a traitor. Let them thirst. I want my brother. The silence that followed was heavy. Character against society. Character against self. The choice was a blade pressing against her throat. Toka walked over to her. He crouched down so that he was eye level with her. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a solid, grounding force. Clara, he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were wide with terror and grief. Do not tell me not to go. Do not tell me the cause is bigger than one boy. He is all I have. I will not tell you that, Toka said. His voice was calm, steady as the earth. A warrior fights for his people. Your brother is your people. He reached out and took the note from her hand. We go to the bridge. Clara blinked, surprised by his answer. You will help me give it to them. I will help you save the boy, Toka said. If the ring is the price, then we pay it. But the water, Clara faltered. Your people. My people have survived without the white man's maps for 1,000 years, Toka said. We will find another way, but you will not find another brother. He stood up and offered her his hand. But listen to me, Clara May Hollis. We pay the price, but we do not let them keep the change. We go on our terms. Clara took his hand. His grip was iron and heat. In that moment, the transactional nature of their alliance evaporated. He was not helping her because of a debt. He was helping her because he saw her pain and chose to carry it with her. The respect in his eyes made her want to weep, but it also made her stand up. The bridge, Clara said, wiping her face. It is the unfinished trestle over Devil's Gorge. It is a narrow pass. If they ambush us, they will try, Toka said. Mallory expects a frightened woman and a desperate savage. He does not expect us." He turned to Ruth and Dr. Ellis. "We need cover. Can you ride to the ridge above the gorge?" "I can shoot a fly off a mule's ear at 300 yards, Ruth said, patting the rifle scabbard on her saddle. "I will be there." "I will prepare the trauma kit," Dr. Ellis said, "just in case." As the others moved to prepare, Clara stood alone by the hearth for a moment. She looked at the ring on her finger, the heavy gold band that had started all of this. It was freedom. It was her mother's legacy. It was the key to the survival of the valley. And she was about to hand it over to a monster. She felt a surge of cold, calculating anger replace her despair. She would give them the ring, but she would not give them the secret. She moved quickly to her sewing basket. She found a scrap of white linen and a piece of charcoal, slipping the ring off her finger. She pressed the fabric against the inner band and rubbed the charcoal over it. The pattern appeared on the cloth, the river, the triangle, the jagged line of the mountains. She folded the small piece of cloth until it was no bigger than a postage stamp. Then, she lifted the hem of her skirt with a needle and thread. She made 3 quick, crude stitches, sewing the fabric into the thick lining of her petticoat. She put the ring back on her finger. Crow would get the gold. He would get the engraving. But if he thought he could kill them and keep the secret, he was wrong. As long as she lived, the map lived. Toka appeared in the doorway. "It is time." Clara grabbed her shotgun. She walked out to meet him. "Toka," she said as he adjusted her saddle girth. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for not making me choose between my heart and my conscience." "A choice made under a knife is not a choice," Toka said. "It is a wound. I would not let you carry that scar." He swung onto his horse. "We ride to the gorge." They rode out under the waning moon. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and cold. The silence of the prairie was profound, broken only by the rhythmic thud of hooves. As they neared the gorge, the landscape changed. The rolling plains gave way to jagged rock and deep fissures. The rail line sat unfinished, a skeleton of timber and iron stretching out over the black abyss of the canyon. Clara felt the ring cold against her skin. She looked at Toka, riding beside her, his silhouette merging with the dark. He was a man of 2 worlds, and she was a woman who had lost hers. But tonight, on the edge of the Devil's Gorge, they were a single force. She touched the hidden lump in the hem of her dress. The stakes had never been higher, and for the first time, Clara May Hollis was playing for keeps. Devil's Gorge was not a place where the earth welcomed travelers. It was a place where the earth cracked open to reveal its teeth. The wind here did not just blow. It screamed through the narrow limestone fissures, carrying with it the stinging bite of sand and the scent of ancient dust. Spanning the chasm was the unfinished railroad trestle, a skeletal rib cage of timber and iron that looked less like a bridge and more like a dare against gravity. The sun had not yet risen, leaving the canyon bathed in a gray, ghostly half-light. The air was cold, sharp enough to cut the breath in the lungs. Clara May Hollis sat atop her horse at the edge of the clearing, 50 yards from the bridge. Beside her, Toka sat motionless on his pony. To the casual eye, he looked relaxed, but Clara saw the tension in the set of his jaw and the way his hand hovered near the lever of his rifle. "They are there," Toka said softly. Clara looked. On the far side of the trestle, where the tracks ended abruptly over the void, 3 figures stood. A wagon was parked nearby. Silas Crow stood in the center, his long coat flapping in the wind like the wings of a vulture. To his left was Agent Whitaker, pacing nervously, his hat pulled low, and to the right, holding a small figure by the collar of his shirt, was Duke Mallory. Toby. He looked so small against the vast emptiness of the gorge. His feet were barely touching the ground, and his hands were bound behind his back. Clara felt a surge of rage so pure it nearly blinded her. She gripped the reins, her knuckles white. "If they hurt him—" "Keep your head," Toka murmured. His voice was a tether, pulling her back from the edge of panic. "Panic kills. Anger focuses. Use the anger." He turned his head slightly, scanning the jagged ridgeline above them. There was no movement, but Toka knew Ruth and Dr. Ellis were there. He also knew that Mateo, a tracker from the borderlands who owed Toka a life debt, was positioned in the scree slope below the bridge, waiting for the signal to cut off a retreat. "We ride in slow," Toka instructed. "Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you run." They urged their horses forward. The hooves clattered against the loose stone, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. As they approached the bridge, Crow stepped forward, a smile plastered on his face that did not reach his predatory eyes. "Miss Hollis?" Crow called out, his voice booming over the wind. "Punctual. I admire that in a business partner." Clara stopped her horse 10 paces from them. She swung down, her boots hitting the dirt with a solid thud. She kept one hand on the reins and the other free, near the pocket where her shotgun shells were kept, though she had left the heavy weapon on her saddle to show she was negotiating. Toka dismounted beside her. He stood just behind her shoulder, a silent shadow. "Where is the ring?" Crow asked, extending a gloved hand. "Where is my brother?" Clara shot back. Her voice did not tremble. She was done trembling. "He is right here," Duke Mallory grunted. He shoved Toby forward. The boy stumbled, his knees scraping the gravel. He had a gag tied around his mouth, but his eyes were wide and terrified. He looked at Clara and made a muffled sound. "Let him go," Clara demanded. "Then you get the ring." "That is not how this works, darlin'," Mallory sneered. He pulled a heavy revolver and pressed the barrel against Toby's temple. "You toss the gold, then the boy walks. You hesitate, and the canyon gets a meal." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Crow. "You are a businessman, Mr. Crow. You want the water rights? You do not want a murder charge for a 10-year-old boy. That brings the marshals." "I own the marshals in this county," Crow said smoothly. "But you are right. I prefer clean transactions. Give me the ring. Clara, go back to your farm. We will even forget about the debt." Whitaker, standing behind Crow, wiped sweat from his upper lip despite the cold. "Just take it. Silas, get the map and let us be done. The longer we stand here, the more exposed we are." Clara reached up to her neck. She unclasped the chain. She held the ring in her fist, letting the gold catch the weak morning light. "I want to see him walk across the bridge first," Clara said. "Halfway, then I throw the ring." Crow hesitated. He looked at the ring, greed sharpening his features. "Fine. Duke, walk the boy to the middle." Mallory grunted but complied. He dragged Toby onto the wooden planks of the unfinished trestle. The wind was stronger there, whistling through the gaps in the timbers. Below them, the river was a thin ribbon of silver, hundreds of feet down. Clara moved forward. Toka moved with her. As she passed him, Toka leaned in. The movement was fluid, almost imperceptible. He brushed past her, his shoulder grazing hers. For a split second, the world narrowed down to the two of them. He reached out, his hand sliding up her arm to cup the back of her neck, his thumb brushing the cool metal of the ring she held against her chest. It was a gesture of possession, of protection, and of startling intimacy in the face of death. "It stays with you," he whispered. The words were a spark in dry grass. "It stays with you." It was not an order, it was an affirmation. He knew she had the copy sewn into her dress, but he was telling her she would keep the gold, too. He was telling her they were not leaving here defeated. His eyes locked with hers, dark, fierce, and burning with a promise of violence that would be unleashed on her behalf. Clara nodded, a microscopic movement. She stepped onto the bridge. She was 10 feet from Mallory and Toby. She held the ring out. "Let him go," she said. Mallory shoved Toby toward her. At the same moment, Clara tossed the ring not to Crow, but high into the air, arching over the side of the bridge toward the abyss. "No!" Crow screamed, lunging forward to try and catch the glinting metal. It was a distraction. The ring was on a fishing line Clara had tied to her wrist in the darkness of the ride. She yanked it back into her palm instantly. But the eyes of every man on the bridge followed the arc. "Kill her! Whitaker shrieked. The agent had cracked. He pulled a snub-nosed pistol from his coat. She knows too much, no witnesses. He leveled the gun at Clara. Crack. A rifle shot rang out from the ridge above. A puff of dust exploded on the wooden beam inches from Whitaker's hand. He yelped, dropping the gun as splinters bit into his skin. Ruth had joined the conversation. "Take cover," Crow yelled, diving behind a stack of railway ties. The bridge exploded into chaos. Toka did not dive for cover. He launched himself forward. He was a blur of motion, covering the distance to Duke Mallory before the bounty hunter could bring his gun back around to Toby. Toka hit Mallory with the force of a battering ram, driving him back against the railing. The wood groaned under their combined weight. Mallory was big, a brawler who relied on size. But Toka fought with the precision of a surgeon. He drove a knee into Mallory's gut, then slammed his forearm into the man's throat. Clara did not watch the fight. She sprinted to Toby. The boy was frozen, staring down through the gaps in the planks where the wind howled. His gag had slipped, but his hands were still bound. "Clara," he sobbed. "I have you," Clara shouted over the wind. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the edge. Whitaker, clutching his bleeding hand, scrambled for his fallen pistol. "You stupid bitch!" he screamed, raising the weapon with his shaking left hand. Clara did not have time to reach for her shotgun. She shoved Toby behind her, shielding his body with her own. But the shot never came. From the rocks below the bridge, a lasso hissed through the air. The loop settled perfectly over Whitaker's shoulders. With a sharp yank, Mateo, hidden in the scree, pulled the rope taut. Whitaker was jerked backward, his feet flying out from under him. He slammed into the railing and flipped over, dangling by his armpits over the drop, screaming as he swung in the wind. Character against nature. The wind buffeted the bridge, making the whole structure sway. The dust kicked up by the struggle blinded everyone. Duke Mallory roared, throwing Toka off him. The bounty hunter drew a knife, a wicked blade with a serrated edge. "I'm going to gut you, redskin." He lunged. Toka did not retreat. He sidestepped the thrust, the blade slicing the air inches from his ribs. He caught Mallory's wrist with one hand and drove his other palm into the man's elbow. There was a sickening snap. Mallory howled. Dropping the knife, he swung a wild haymaker with his good arm, but Toka ducked under it. Toka swept Mallory's legs, sending the big man crashing to the deck. In a heartbeat, Toka was on top of him, his own knife drawn and pressed against Mallory's throat. The bounty hunter froze. He stared up at the Comanche, waiting for the cut, waiting for the savage act that would justify every lie he had ever told about wild Indians. "Do it," Mallory hissed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Finish it." Toka looked down at him. His chest heaved, his eyes hard as flint. He felt the vibration of the bridge, the fear of the boy, the gaze of the woman he had sworn to protect. Killing this man would be easy. It would be justice. But Toka remembered the way Clara had looked at him when he bought the ring. He remembered the town that called him a monster. He pulled the knife back. "No," Toka said, his voice cutting through the wind. "You are not worth the stain on my blade." He rose, holstering his knife. He grabbed Mallory by the collar and dragged him to the center of the bridge, throwing him down next to the trembling Crow. "It is over! Crow!" Clara shouted. She had cut Toby's bonds with a small penknife she carried. She stood tall, her arm around her brother, the wind whipping her hair around her face like a war banner. Crow looked up. His suit was covered in dust, his dignity shredded. "You have nothing. Miss Hollis, you assaulted a federal agent, you kidnapped a child, I will have you hanged." "I do not think so," a deep voice boomed. Dr. Ellis rode out from the tree line, flanked by Ruth. The doctor held up a thick leather ledger. "We found your bookkeeping." "Silas," Ellis called out. "The bribes to Whitaker, the forged deeds, the telegrams ordering the removal of the natives. The territorial marshal is going to find it very interesting reading." Crow's face went pale. He looked at Whitaker, dangling helplessly over the edge, then at Mallory, broken on the floor. He looked at the ring on Clara's finger, realizing he had been played. This This is a misunderstanding, Crow stammered, holding up his hands. We can make a deal. I have money, real money. Your money is no good here, Toka said. He stepped between Crow and Clara. And neither are you. Toka looked at Clara. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a sharp, vibrating clarity. She looked wild and beautiful, fierce in her defense of her kin. She was no longer the schoolteacher who feared the town's judgment. She was something new, something forged in fire. Are you hurt? Toka asked, ignoring the villains cowering on the planks. No, Clara said, clutching Toby tight. We are safe. She looked at the ring on her hand. It was still there. She had kept the promise. Let us get off this bridge, Clara said, her voice steady. I do not like the view. Toka nodded. He signaled to Mateo, who began to haul the whimpering Whitaker up from the abyss. They would tie them up and leave them for the marshals. As they walked back toward solid ground, the sun finally crested the canyon wall. It flooded the gorge with brilliant, golden light, chasing away the gray shadows. It illuminated the red dust on their clothes, turning it into a badge of honor. Clara walked beside Toka. She did not take his arm, but she walked close enough that their shadows touched and merged on the dusty earth. The bridge behind them creaked in the wind, a monument to a battle won not by firepower, but by the courage to stand firm when the ground beneath them was falling away. Toby looked up at his sister, then at the tall Comanche warrior. Is it over, Clara? Clara looked at Toka. He met her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the reflection of the same vast, untamed land that lay in her heart. The fight is over, Toby, Clara said softly. But the story is just beginning. She touched the ring one last time, feeling the warmth of the metal against her skin. It stayed with her, and now she knew. So did he. The dust of Copper Creek did not settle simply because the shooting had stopped. It hung in the air, thick and persistent, much like the mood of the town in the days following the confrontation at Devil's Gorge. 3 days had passed since Silas Crow had been escorted away in irons by the territorial marshal, a man who had ridden in on the noon train with a face like a thunderstorm. The evidence provided by Dr. Ellis the ledger, the forged deeds, and the testimonies of the men Mateo had pulled from the canyon had been damning. But the law moved like a heavy wagon with a broken wheel, slow, grinding, and prone to getting stuck in the mud. Clara May Hollis walked down the main boardwalk, her boots clicking rhythmically against the weathered wood. She held her head high, her spine stiffened by a new kind of resolve, but she could feel the eyes of the town upon her. They were heavy, physical things. These stares, Mrs. Gable, the milliner who had once praised Clara's needlepoint, turned her back as Clara approached, busying herself with a display of ribbons in the window. The message was clear. You consorted with the enemy. You brought violence to our doorstep. Yet, as Clara passed the blacksmith's forge, the burly man looked up from his anvil. He paused, his hammer suspended in the air. He did not smile, but he nodded a sharp, distinct dipping of his chin. It was an acknowledgement. He had heard about the water rights. He knew that if Crow had won, every man in this valley would have been paying a premium for every drop of water their cattle drank. Society did not change its mind in a single night. The lines drawn in the sand between civilized and savage were deep, carved by decades of fear and rhetoric. Clara understood this now. She was no longer the invisible schoolteacher struggling to pay a debt. She was the woman who had walked onto the bridge with a Comanche warrior. To some, she was a hero. To most, she was a scandal. She turned the corner and entered the small office of Dr. Ellis. The bell above the door chimed, a familiar sound that used to signal anxiety but now signaled sanctuary. Ruth was there, sitting on the edge of the examination table, cleaning a rifle. Dr. Ellis was at his desk, sorting through a stack of papers that looked official and intimidating. The marshal has taken Whitaker to Fort Griffin, Dr. Ellis said without preamble. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deeper than before. And Crow is being held in the jailhouse until the circuit judge arrives next month. His lawyers are already swarming like flies on a carcass, claiming entrapment, claiming self-defense. Will he get out? Clara asked, taking a seat. He might avoid the hangman, Ruth said, snapping the breech of her rifle closed. Money has a way of loosening the noose, but he is finished here. The railroad company has suspended his contract pending an investigation into the bribery. They do not mind a little theft, but they hate bad publicity. And the land? Clara asked. The deed to the canyon lands is void, Dr. Ellis said. Because the survey was fraudulent, the water rights revert to the original claim, which means, technically, they belong to the public domain, accessible to those with adjacent homesteads. He looked at Clara meaningfully. Your homestead is the closest legal claim to the canyon entrance. Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a week. So, it is over. The shooting is over, Ruth corrected. The gossip is just getting started. You know they are calling you the Comanche Queen down at the saloon, and that is the polite version. Let them talk, Clara said. She looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were still bruised from the struggle on the bridge, and her fingernails were broken. I have my brother, I have my land, and I have my dignity. That is more than I had last week. And the warrior, Dr. Ellis asked gently. Where is he? He went back to his people, Clara said. He had his own battles to fight. 10 miles away, in the temporary encampment of the Quahati band. Toka stood before the council fire. The mood was not celebratory. The people were wary. They had seen the smoke from the bridge, and they had heard the rumors that White Wolf had fought alongside a white woman to save a white boy. A young brave, barely 18 years old, stepped forward. His name was Peter. He looked at Toka with suspicion. You rode with the enemy, Peter said. You risked your life for one of them. Why did she promise you gold? Did she promise you whiskey? Toka did not react to the insult. He stood still, his arms loose at his sides. I did not ride for gold, he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crackle of the fire. I rode for the truth. He gestured to the edge of the camp, where Gray Bear sat wrapped in a warm blanket, eating a bowl of stew. The elder had been returned to his family, battered but alive. The white man, Crow, stole our water, Toka continued. He stole our kin. If I had not fought, Gray Bear would be dead, and the spring at Split Rock would be fenced off with iron wire. Now, the wire is cut, the water flows free, and the man who hunted us is in a cage. He looked around the circle of faces weather-beaten, hungry, proud men and women who were being squeezed into an ever-shrinking corner of the world. I helped the woman, Toka said, because she stood against the same darkness we fight. A wolf does not ask the color of the hand that opens the trap. He only knows he is free. Gray Bear spoke then, his voice raspy but commanding. He speaks true. The woman carries the ring of the healer. She returned the map not to the white man, but to the earth. She kept the secret of the spring safe until the danger passed. The tension in the circle broke. Peter stepped back, lowering his eyes. It was not a hero's welcome. Toka did not expect one. To walk between worlds was to be forever suspected by both sides. But he had kept his honor clean. He had proven that a man could touch the fire of the white world without being consumed by it. 2 days later, Clara rode out to the canyon. She told Toby she was going to check the fence lines, but she rode past the boundary of her farm, up the rocky incline toward the twisted Snake Creek. The air was cooler here, smelling of pine resin and damp stone. She found the spot easily. The split rock rose like a jagged tooth from the canyon floor. And there, bubbling up from beneath the limestone, was the spring. It was not a torrent, just a steady, clear pulse of water that fed a small pool before trickling down into the dry creek bed. Toka was already there. He was sitting on a flat rock near the water, sharpening his knife with a whetstone. He did not look up as she approached, but she knew he had heard her coming for the last mile. Clara dismounted and tied Bess to a scrub oak. She walked to the edge of the pool. The silence between them was not heavy. It was comfortable, like an old coat. You found it, Toka said, finally looking up. It was not hard, Clara replied. The ring led the way. She sat down on the grass a few feet from him. She pulled the ring from her pocket. She had taken it off the chain and put it back on her finger, but it felt different now. It was no longer a burden of the past. She took a small penknife from her skirt pocket. With careful, deliberate movements, she scratched a small mark on the inside of the gold band, right next to the triangle her mother had engraved. What are you doing? Toka asked. Marking the date, Clara said. My mother marked the day she made the treaty for the water. I am marking the day I decided to keep it. She slipped the ring back onto her finger. It flashed in the sunlight. I thought about selling it again, after everything, to pay off the feed bill. And I realized that would be selling the only thing I have that is truly mine, Clara said. Freedom is not having zero debts. Toka, freedom is choosing which debts you want to carry. Toka stopped his sharpening. He sheathed the knife and turned his body toward her. You have changed. Clara May Hollis, the dust of the town does not stick to you as it used to. I hope not, she said. He reached out and dipped his hand into the pool of water. He cupped it, letting it run through his fingers. Listen. Clara frowned. To what? The earth, Toka said. Close your eyes. Clara hesitated, then closed them. Do not listen to the wind. Toka's voice was low, blending with the rustle of the leaves. Listen to the water under the ground, before it breaks the surface. It hums. Can you hear it? Clara concentrated. At first, she heard only the wind and the blood rushing in her ears. But then, she felt a vibration in the rock beneath her, a low, steady thrumming, the sound of life pushing against stone. I hear it, she whispered. That is the sound of survival, Toka said. It does not ask for permission to flow. It just finds a way. Clara opened her eyes. Toka was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was the intimacy she had feared and craved. Not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled closeness of the bridge, but this, the quiet sharing of a secret language. Now you teach me, Toka said. Teach you what? He reached into his pouch and pulled out the empty medicine bottle she had given him to hold during the fight. He held it up. The words, the white man's marks. I can track a lizard across stone, but I cannot read the warning on the bottle that saves a life. Clara smiled. She moved closer, until her shoulder was almost touching his. She took the bottle. She pointed to the label. L, she said softly. L, Toka repeated. His voice was deep, wrapping around the letter. Audanum. She spelled it out. Laudanum. It means relief, sleep, but too much of it is poison. Like many things, Toka murmured. Like peace. A little is good. Too much makes you weak. He looked from the bottle to her face. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air between them crackled. It would have been easy to lean in. It would have been easy to let the memory of that kiss in the pawn shop ignite into something more. But they did not. Toka pulled back slightly, setting a boundary that was as much for her protection as his own. The railroad is still coming. Clara, Crow is gone, but the Iron Horse does not stop. In 2 months, the tracks will reach the edge of the canyon. I know, Clara said. The reality of the world intruded on their sanctuary, but it did not shatter it. But this time, we have the leverage. The survey proved that the water source is here. If they want to fill their boilers, they have to deal with the owner of the land. You, Toka said. Us, Clara corrected. She looked out at the canyon. I have been thinking. I am not going to fence it off, and I am not going to sell it to the railroad company. Then what will you do? I am going to open a trade post, Clara said, the idea forming fully into words for the first time. Right here at the junction, a place where the train stops for water. But I will trade the water for supplies, flour, cloth, medicine, real goods. She turned to him. And I will trade with your people, too. Fair prices, no credit, no debt. Water for meat, medicine for hides, a place where both sides can step onto the porch and not be shot at. Toka looked at her, surprised. A meeting place in the middle of a war. The war has to end somewhere, Clara said firmly. Why not here? Why not with a business deal that is actually honest? Toka was silent for a long time. He looked at the woman who sat before him, small, pale, but with a spirit as tough as the mesquite root. It will be dangerous, he said. The town will hate you for trading with us. My people will distrust you for trading with the railroad. I know, Clara said. That is why I need a partner, someone who knows the land, someone who can ensure that when the Comanche ride in, they leave their lances at the gate, and when the soldiers ride in, they keep their pistols holstered. She looked him in the eye. I cannot pay you in gold, Toka, but I can pay you in a share of the trade, and I can promise you that as long as I hold this land, your people will never be turned away from this water. Toka looked at the ring on her finger, then out at the horizon where the smoke of the distant train could be seen. He was a warrior who had lost his war before he was born. The buffalo were disappearing. The fences were closing in. But here, in this narrow strip of shadow and light, there was a chance to build something that was not a grave. I will not live in your house, Toka said. My roof is the sky. I would not ask you to, Clara said. But, Toka continued, I will set my camp on the ridge above the spring. I will watch the road. If the trade is fair, I will be the bridge. And if it is not, then I will be the flood, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Clara laughed, a genuine, bright sound that startled a hawk from the scrub oak. Deal. They sat there for a while longer as the sun began to dip toward the west, painting the canyon walls in shades of ochre and violet. They did not hold hands, but the space between them felt charged with a quiet, enduring electricity. It was a relationship moving into a new phase, not the desperate passion of survival, but the steady, deliberate construction of a future. It will be hard, Clara said softly, watching the light change on the water. Yes, Toka agreed, but easy paths lead only to the slaughterhouse. He stood up and offered a hand to pull her up. This time, when skin touched skin, it was a confirmation of a contract that no lawyer could write and no sheriff could enforce. Go home, Clara May Hollis, Toka said. Feed your brother. Tomorrow, we build... Clara mounted Bess. She looked back at him one last time. He stood by the split rock, a sentinel of the old world guarding the gate to the new. Tomorrow, she repeated. She rode back toward the homestead as the evening star appeared in the darkening sky. The town of Copper Creek lay ahead, full of whispers and judgment, but for the first time in years. Clara did not feel the crushing weight of her mother's ring. She felt only its warmth and the lightness of a woman who had finally claimed her own name. The autumn of 1875 brought a different kind of heat to the Texas Panhandle. It was not the scorching, desperate fire of the drought, but the steady, rhythmic burn of industry. The railroad tracks, once a skeletal threat on the horizon, were now iron realities bolted into the earth, stretching from the east all the way to the edge of the canyon. Clara May Hollis wiped her hands on her apron, stepping out onto the porch of what was no longer just a homestead. A hand-painted sign swung above her head, creaking slightly in the wind. Hollis Way Station, Water Provisions. The yard was busy. A dozen men from the survey team were finishing their midday meal at the long trestle tables Clara had set up under the shade of the new awning. The smell of sourdough biscuits, roasted venison, and strong coffee filled the air, replacing the scent of fear that had hung over this place only months ago. Clara did not look like a woman who had been saved. She looked like a woman who was tired, efficient, and entirely in command. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot, and her dress was simple calico, but her boots were new, bought with her own earnings. She walked over to the foreman, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the pawnbroker who was counting out coins on the table. 40 meals for the week, Miss Hollis, the foreman said, sliding the silver dollars across the wood. And the water fee for the mules. Clara counted the money. She did not rush. She counted it twice, out loud. $22.50. That is correct. You drive a hard bargain for a cup of coffee? The foreman chuckled, though there was respect in his eyes. I sell quality. Mr. Henderson, Clara said, sweeping the coins into her pocket. And I do not sell on credit. Fair enough. He tipped his hat. See you at supper. As the men went back to work, the rhythmic clang, clang, clang of hammers on spikes resumed. It was the heartbeat of the New West. Clara touched her pocket. The weight of the silver was comforting, but it was not the heavy, suffocating weight of a loan. It was the weight of labor. She had paid off the last of her father's debts to the general store 2 weeks ago. She had paid the property taxes yesterday. Every board in this new porch, every sack of flour in the pantry, belonged to her. She had not needed a husband to secure it, and she had not needed a hero to pay for it. She had done it with a ledger, a stove, and the courage to stand her ground. Later that afternoon, Clara rode Bess into Copper Creek. The town had changed, too. With Silas Crow awaiting trial in the territorial capital and Agent Whitaker removed from his post, the suffocating grip of corruption had loosened. It had not disappeared. Greed was as perennial as the mesquite weed, but the air felt lighter. Clara tied her horse outside the general store. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, she saw Mrs. Gable, the milliner who had turned her back on Clara during the height of the scandal. Mrs. Gable was sweeping her stoop. She froze when she saw Clara. For a long moment, the two women looked at one another. The street was quiet. The judgment that had once been a wall between them had eroded into something more like embarrassment. "Afternoon, Mrs. Gable," Clara said, her voice even. "Mrs." Gable hesitated. She looked at Clara's straight back, her clean clothes, and the undeniable fact that Clara Hollis was now the most important business partner the railroad had in the county. "Afternoon, Miss Hollis," Mrs. Gable said. She paused, then added, her voice dropping lower. I heard your brother is doing well. I have some wool, good wool, if you need a winter coat for the boy." It was not an apology. People in Copper Creek did not apologize easily, but it was an offering. It was a bridge. "He is growing fast," Clara said, accepting the peace treaty. "I will stop by next week to look at the fabric." Clara continued down the street. She passed the sheriff's office, where a new man, a former ranger with a reputation for being boringly honest, sat on the bench. He tipped his hat to her. She entered Dr. Ellis's clinic. The bell chimed. "You are late," Dr. Ellis said without looking up from his medical journal. "I had to feed the railroad," Clara said, smiling. She placed a basket on his desk. "Fresh bread, and a jar of peach preserves. Ruth told me you were eating nothing but dried beef." "Ruth talks too much," the doctor grumbled, but he eyed the bread hungrily. "How is the patient?" "Toby is running faster than I can catch him," Clara said. "The fever is a memory." Dr. Ellis leaned back in his chair. "And the other patient, the one who lives on the ridge?" Clara's smile softened, turning into something more private. "He is not a patient. Doctor, he is well. I saw him yesterday," Dr. Ellis said. "He brought in a man from the construction crew who had broken his leg. Set the bone himself before he even got here. Better job than I would have done." The doctor took off his spectacles and polished them. "You know, Clara, there were people who said he would turn wild again once the shooting stopped. They said a wolf cannot guard a sheepfold without tasting blood." "He is not guarding a sheepfold," Clara said firmly. "And I am not a sheep." "No," Ellis agreed. "You certainly are not. But the town is watching. They see him riding freely between the canyon and the station. They see the trade. It makes them nervous, but it also makes them think, you are teaching them a lesson." Clara, without ever opening a school book, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon when Clara returned to the way station. The workers had retired to their tents down the line. The yard was quiet. On the ridge overlooking the spring, a silhouette sat on a pony. Clara did not wave. She simply walked to the edge of the porch and lit the oil lantern that hung by the post. It was a signal, simple and silent. The day is done, the fire is lit. A few minutes later, Toka rode into the yard. He did not look like the desperate warrior who had stormed the bridge. He looked healthier, his buckskins mended, his horse well fed, but he had not cut his hair, and he had not traded his moccasins for boots. He wore the clothes of his people with an easy pride. He dismounted and tied his pony next to Bess. He carried a bundle wrapped in leather. "The survey team asked for meat," Toka said, placing the bundle on the table. "3 deer, dressed and salted." "I will put it on the ledger," Clara said. "The paymaster arrives on Friday. You will get the silver then." "Keep the silver," Toka said. "We need blankets. The winter comes early this year, and coffee." "I have the blankets set aside," Clara said. "And the coffee is hot." They sat on the porch steps as the twilight deepened into purple. This had become their ritual. The exchange of goods, the discussion of business, and then the quiet. "I took Gray Bear back to the winter camp," Toka said, staring out at the darkening prairie. "He walks with a limp now, but he walks." He told the council that the white woman at the spring keeps her word. "And what did they say?" Clara asked. "They said we shall see." Toka replied, "Trust is not a stone, Clara. It is a plant. It grows slow, and it needs rain." "We have had enough rain for a while," Clara joked, thinking of the storm that had saved them. Peeta, the young one, asked to come with me next time. Toka said, "He wants to see the train." "He is welcome," Clara said, "as long as he leaves his lance at the ridge." "I told him." Toka nodded. "I told him the train is louder than thunder, but it cannot be fought with arrows. It must be understood." He turned to look at her. The lantern light reflected in his dark eyes. "You have built a strong house, Clara May Hollis." "We built it," Clara corrected. "I could not have held the water without you. You held the water because you knew what it was worth." Toka said, "I only stood beside you while you did it." 2 weeks later, the day arrived. The first locomotive of the Texas Pacific Line was scheduled to cross the Trestle Bridge and stop at Hollis Station to take on water. It was a crisp, cold morning. The frost lay on the ground like a dusting of diamond dust. A crowd had gathered from the town: the mayor, the sheriff, Mrs. Gable, even the blacksmith. They stood in their Sunday best, looking a mixture of proud and apprehensive. Clara stood on the platform. She wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that matched her eyes, and a heavy shawl. Toby stood beside her, his hair slicked down, vibrating with excitement. "Do you hear it, Clara?" Toby squealed. "Do you hear the whistle?" "I hear it," Clara said. "Far down the canyon." A mournful, high-pitched wail echoed off the stone walls. It was a sound that marked the end of silence. Toka stood at the far end of the platform, away from the townspeople. He stood with his arms crossed, his face impassive. Peeta stood beside him, eyes wide, clutching a blanket as if it were a shield. The ground began to tremble. Then, around the bend of the cliff, the black iron beast appeared. It was massive, spewing steam and smoke, its wheels churning with a violence that seemed to tear the very air apart. It roared across the Trestle Bridge, the same bridge where they had almost died, and slowed as it approached the station. The brakes screeched, a sound like 1,000 banshees, and the train hissed to a halt. The steam enveloped the platform, smelling of coal and oil. The townspeople cheered. The mayor stepped forward to shake the hand of the conductor. Clara watched. It was impressive. It was inevitable. But as she looked through the steam, she saw Toka. He had not moved. He was watching the machine not with fear, but with a cold calculation. He was measuring it. He was understanding it. The conductor, a man with a gold watch and a uniform that looked too clean for the frontier, stepped down. He spotted Clara. "Miss Hollis," he called out. "We are ready for the tank hookup, and I have a mail sack for Copper Creek." "The tank is unlocked," Clara called back, "and the coffee is inside." She walked over to Toka. The steam swirled around them, creating a private fog bank in the middle of the celebration. "It is loud," Toka said. "It is," Clara agreed. "And it brings the world with it. New laws, Toka murmured. New strangers. New hunger. We will handle them, Clara said. Just like we handled Crow. Crow was a man. Toka said, This is a force. It will try to eat everything. The land, the silence, the people. Then we make sure it chokes on us, Clara said fiercely. Toka looked down at her, and a slow smile spread across his face. It was the smile of the man who had kissed her hand in the pawn shop, dangerous, admiring, and deeply connected. You are a warrior, Clara, he said. You just wear different war paint. The sun was fully up now, piercing through the steam. The light hit Clara's chest. She was wearing the ring. Not on her finger, where it could catch on the work she did every day, but on a strong silver chain around her neck. It rested against her collarbone, the gold dull and heavy. Toka reached out. The crowd was watching the train. No one was watching them, or perhaps they just did not care anymore. He brushed his knuckles against the ring. The contact sent a shiver through Clara that had nothing to do with the cold. It stays with you, he said softly. Clara covered his hand with hers, pressing it against the ring, against her heart. It stays, she whispered. And so do you. I am here, Toka said. I am not in the wagon, and I am not on the train. I am on the land, and as long as you are on the land, I am with you. It was not a proposal of marriage. It was not a promise of a fairy tale ending where he moved into the cabin and wore a suit. It was something more real. It was a treaty between two sovereign nations of one. It was a partnership forged in the knowledge that they were different, and that those differences made them stronger together. The whistle blew again, sharp and demanding. The conductor shouted, All aboard! They are leaving, Toby yelled, running up to them. Look, Clara! It is moving! The train lurched forward, beginning its journey west, carrying mail, carrying soldiers, carrying the future. Clara and Toka stood side by side on the platform. The wind from the train whipped Clara's skirt and Toka's hair, but they did not flinch. They stood rooted, two pillars of a new world that they were carving out of the dust. As the caboose disappeared around the bend, leaving a trail of smoke hanging in the blue sky, Clara looked at the horizon. There will be another one tomorrow, she said, and another after that. Toka agreed. And one day, perhaps, one that brings a judge who is not bought, or a treaty that is not broken. We can hope, Clara said. We do not hope, Toka said, turning to walk toward his horse, his movement fluid and untamed. We prepare. Clara watched him mount his pony. He raised a hand in farewell, not a wave, but a salute. She returned it. She looked down at the ring on her chest. In the bright morning sun, the gold caught the light. It flared for a moment, brilliant and intense. It looked like a small fire, a fire that was not big enough to burn down the forest, not wild enough to destroy the world, but warm enough and steady enough to keep the cold at bay. Clara smiled. She tucked the ring inside her dress, against her skin. Back to work, she said to herself. She turned and walked back into the station, the bell above the door chiming a clear, strong note that rang out across the prairie, signaling that Hollis Station was open for business, and that Clara May Hollis was exactly where she belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Clara and Toka. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Are you listening from a bustling city, a quiet countryside, or maybe somewhere in between? Let's chat in the comments, and if you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button or share it with a friend. Your support helps these stories reach more people and keeps the campfire burning. Thank you, and I will see you on the next trail.